It's still Editors Forum on Galaxy Television with Layo Shubo for Lauren Show, and I still have with me in the studio Mr. Leko Shote. And now I think I have Mr. Meka Madunagu too. Do I have you? Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay. So let's quickly delve into the NLC TUC strike. Now, as seen in the report, or as heard in the report, many people in some quarters say, the NLC didn't care to even know if they are part of the strike or if they wanted the strike, but rather it is born out of personal interest and gain. Do you agree with that, or what do you have to say to that?
No, well, for me, it's unfortunate that once again we found ourselves with an indefinite strike, which ended after a few days. But the point is that you see, it arose out of impunity. The attack on the president of the NLC in Imo State, and that shouldn't have happened. You see, a situation where government is seen to be indulging in practices that it ought to fight against, it ought not to allow. Then you have a situation where you can just imagine the consequences. Before any action is taken, before people take any action, they should consider the consequences. Because you see, you only know what you can do. You don't know what the other side might, be up to. Now, definitely, the NLC president was there. He was in continuation of an engagement with the state government on workers' rights, on workers' benefits. But what happened? They pounced on him and what thought believed to have been sponsored by the state government pounced on him in conjunction with the police, and they beat him up. You saw the photograph. Why did the governor come out to apologize if the state government had no hand in it? Why did they suddenly start denying if the state government had no hand in it? You saw some of the articles, some of the things that lackeys of the state government put on social media, denouncing the NLC president and all that. You see, that is the stuff of small minds. When issues arise, people ought to situate engagements within parameters that relate to the issue at hand, not trying to personalize it, to turn it to an ethnic affair or a religious affair. No. That's the result.
But don't you think that is what the strike? That was the same line the strike told. Because on the front burner, don't you think that is the same path or the same line that strike told? Because the first and major reason that the NLC gave for the strike is the alleged brutalization of its leader. So is that not still on personal interest too? Because you mentioned that things are consequences and people should look at the consequences of their actions. So did the NLC look at the consequences of that strike on the Nigerian economy, despite the hardship in the nation now? And then looking at one of the reasons put forward for the call for the strike is the alleged brutalization of its leader. So is that not tilting towards personal gains too?
No, not at all. If an offense to one is an offense to all, even if it wasn't the NLC president, it could have been an ordinary Nigerian. Don't forget, the first World War was sparked off after it began after the killing of Archduke Ferdinand. That was an individual. But look at the number of nations that went to war over that matter. So, you see, an injury to one is an injury to all. Government officials must treat every Nigerian with dignity. They must accord Nigerians the due respect. You don't just, go about throwing your powers, using the police and miscreants to brutalize ordinary citizens. You need to think very well, seriously, because you see that was just an attempt by the state government to show that yes, it could use force to put down the NLC. But listen, that NLC was in the vanguard of the fight to end military rule. Where were those people? Those people who attacked Georgia, where were they? Where were they when courageous Nigerians were out in the trenches on the streets, fighting military, risking their lives? Some were even sent to jail on trumped up charges. Where were they? Now democracy has come, and people who never partook in the fight to enthrone democracy, to restore the nation to democracy. They have now come and hijacked space. What we have now is state capture of every aspect. That is unacceptable. The demands of labor were genuine, legitimate demands. The state government should have addressed those demands instead of sending thugs and policemen to brutalize the NLC president. I mean, a situation where we have to resort to jungle justice. We have to resort to counter tactics. We have to resort to strong people, to muzzle dissent, to muzzle the free right, the constitutional right of the people to express to express themselves freely. Then what are we doing? We're not, we're affronting the Constitution. You are saying that the Constitution doesn't matter, and what the result can only be anarchy, can only be chaos. We don't want a chaotic society. We don't want anarchy. So the point is this: negotiation. They should have negotiated with Nigeria. Yes, NLC shut down the state. Yes, but it doesn't preclude. That could have also been resolved. You've seen the way the federal government has been going about its negotiations with Labour. You never saw any day that Labour was brutal, any of the Labour leaders was brutalized or beaten. No, they were received, and discussions are still ongoing. Don't forget, the federal government it will pay 35,000 monthly for the next 6 months.
Okay, before we go into that, let me come back to Mr. Shote.
You don't go about brutalizing citizens. It is abhorrent. It is unlawful and is condemnable.
All right, let me come back to Mr. Shote in the studio. Now, one other thing that question or say concern that has been raised in many quarters is the timing of this say protest in Imo State and then eventually the nationwide strike. It is during electioneering period. Elections are forthcoming and still tilting on towards personal interest and gains. Many are of the opinion that the NLC leader, being an indigene of Imo State himself, has a thing with the governor, and then that is why he wanted or he put that forward to disrupt the campaign and electioneering process in the state. What do you have to say to that? Do you think that timing is right?
It was wrong. Now let's get this: labor unions, by law, by tradition, by convention, strike, protests are some of their weapons, and negotiations too. And you cannot say, it depends on what the issues are, how much government has been paying attention to these issues. And then you now feel, okay, as a last resort, the strike is supposed to be the last resort. For me, timing the election and the protest to electioneering time, I find it believe that it is wrong, bad timing. And I even think it is intentional, to disrupt somebody else's. Look,
although there were issues on ground, issues of workers not being paid by the same government.
I get that. I understand that very well. I'm with the party on that 100%. I mean, the Labour.
The Labour.
Yes, they have a right to protest, the elections of
the non-payment of salaries.
Yes, I'm with them for that. during election time, the week of the election. I think something is wrong with that. They should not have done that. They could have done that before or even after the election. Not during that week of the election. It sounds like somebody has some interest. That's my impression, and I stand to be corrected. I am not with the president of NLC on that at all. I don't agree. It was bad timing for the state congress to fix the protest during the time of election, the week of the election. I think.
So let's flip it to this side. Now, the police claims it didn't do that to the president. It didn't brutalize the president.
I'm sorry, I wasn't there, but I don't believe the police. I'm sorry. I don't believe them.
Okay.
Why was the National Security Advisor apologizing? That's Lou, but why was he apologizing? Why was he saying that, oh, 2 people have been picked?
Another point I even wanted to mention is, 2 people have been picked. What exactly? What has happened?
Or what are you going to do with them?
Who are the 2 people? What led them to this? Why are they just the people that, what? All of these questions have to be asked.
I never believed them. I never believed that the police is not involved. I wasn't there, so I'm not doing, but I don't believe it.
Okay, and another thing, personally, this bothers me because, over time they say Labour Congress and Labour unions in the nation have been silent. They haven't been very active, and now we are seeing Labour Congress being active, pressing the necks of the government, be it state or federal government. But people are now coming out to say they are overdoing. That is wrong to do.
See, 2 things. One, like I said, the timing of the Imo State protest, for me, was wrong. Now, if the government agents or thugs, as also alleged, beat up Ajero, that is no reason for them to go on strike. Go to court, take whoever you think is responsible for the action against you to court. Why would you call a strike because your president went to play politics in his home state? Because that's the impression I get. You want to use the office, I think he wants to use the office of the president of NLC to play politics in his home state. I think that is wrong. And then you get beaten, and then you now want to call a strike. I don't subscribe to that at all. I don't agree with that, and I think the Labour Congress is overplaying hands. They are using this. They want to put all of us into unnecessary sufferance and plunder because somebody was wrong-headed in his decision to use the institution, public institution, to advance private interests. I think that is wrong.
Do I still have Mr. Majinagu there? I don't think he will want to agree with you on this. Mr. Majinagu, are you still there? Okay, so please say something to Mr. Shorter's stance.
What private interest? I said it earlier that Labour was in the forefront of the agitation to end military rule. And Labour was in the trenches for years. Do you know how long it took to get the military back to the barracks? And then now, we have unfortunately been by some dictators in civilian garb. The state government knew that the elections were coming. It could have quickly concluded negotiations with Labour, or at least provided sufficient, made sufficient progress, in its negotiations with Labour, so that you see it will not have, snowballed into the elections. We need to deal with issues, and avoid blackmail, avoid all this, resort to personalizing issues. I mean, okay, for the sake of argument, can we say, okay, that it was the right thing, that brutalizing because the strike took, the strike in Imo State took place on the eve of an election, that the right thing to do was to brutalize the NLC president. That was barbaric. You can't justify violence, because an injury to one Nigerian is an injury to all Nigerians. So one thing we must know is that we must hold government officials accountable. We must hold government officials accountable. We must ensure that the rule of law prevails. We cannot have the rule of the jungle. The same state, the same government that has resorted, that has a tool to oppress Nigerians, ought to know that, you see, that era is gone. That era went with the military. When anytime labor wanted to, call industrial action, they will run to the National Industrial Court to get a spurious injunction. To get spurious injunctions. This injunction that the National Industrial Court keeps issuing. Injunctions are meant to be a temporary tool in a matter, in litigation. Injunctions are not a permanent tool. But you find out in certain cases that judges have turned injunctions into a tool, on behalf of politicians to help. That's why you see perpetual injunction being issued against agencies of state, to prevent agencies of state from carrying out their duties when it concerns politicians who are in the good books of the ruling party. At least there's a perpetual injunction that has not been vacated, against the EFCC by a former governor of Rivers State. So we cannot subvert the constitution. We cannot subvert the rule of law. You see, we must engage in negotiations. When you know that an election is coming up,
before we go out of the injunction, as you mentioned, I was also going to ask a question on that. So you mentioned earlier, we don't want anarchy in the nation. Two wrongs also do not make a right. Now, there was an injunction. Yes. We have seen federal government agencies, downplay the supremacy of law and not obey court injunctions, orders. We saw that in the case of DSS and Emefiele, which is still ongoing anyway. The court asked that he be released, and the DSS did not obey the court order. So many other cases like that, and the citizens were saying that is wrong to do. You should obey the law. There is the supremacy and rule of law for every nation. But now the NLC and the TUC are doing the same thing. But you mentioned earlier, we don't want anarchy. We don't want, two wrongs do not make a right. Is that not also a wrong thing? But before you answer, let's quickly take this break. Before you answer my question, let's go on this commercial break. And when we return, I'll give you room to answer your question. All right, Mr. Majnago, please go ahead.
You see, two wrongs do not make a right. The same government that expected labor to obey the recurring injunctions of the National Industrial Court has refused to also obey others. A government that has been in serious breach of breaches of court orders is the same government asking people. That is just laughable. It is laughable. The National Industrial Court should actually now go to object of a suit. If the federal government feels that there is an issue on ground, if the federal government feels that it has a grounds with labor, the federal government should simply go to the main suit. Not a situation where you keep rolling out injunctions. Whenever labor declares an industrial action, you run quickly to the National Industrial Court. That to me is a judicial ambush. That to me is using the judiciary to ambush the will of the people. Whereas you can actually decide to negotiate with labor. You can actually decide to deal with the issues. And don't forget, before the Imo issue came up, labor had been talking about, going on a fresh strike because the federal government had been slow in responding, in acting on its demands. So these are very serious issues that need to be looked into. You see, it's not just enough to say, oh, yeah, the National Industrial Court has bad labor. No, 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 no. You can't use the judiciary to subvert the will of the people. So we must all agree that, okay, fine, labor has said that it has so and so and so demands. Those demands are legitimate. So what you have to do is to ensure that you negotiate with labor. You don't come grandstanding because you are the federal government or a state government, and then you're subverting the rights of the people. Well, and you expect that, okay, you have removed subsidy, and look at the attendant pains. You now expect that people should just be quiet. You are selling fuel at over 600 naira. In some parts of the country, fuel is now over 700 naira per liter. Now people are crying. Then you say you floated the dollar, and then that has spiked inflation, the inflation rate. And then you find a situation where people are crying. Travel around. I have traveled around in some places, and I know people are crying. The agony is so much, the anguish is so much. And then you expect people not to talk simply because you can go to the National Industrial Court and get an injunction. You see, let us, I think government should stop this judicial oppression, this use of the judiciary to oppress Nigerians. Instead, let it deal with the issues. In the same time, at the same period, you're giving National Assembly members Jeeps, SUVs, worth 160 million each. You are approving vehicles for the office of the wife of the president, an office that's not recognized by the Constitution. At the same time, you are approving 5 billion for a presidential yacht. At the same time, you are approving humongous allowances for National Assembly members. And then you say, oh, labor should not go on strike. You see, we tend to be.
Okay, let me come back to Mr. Ashote in the studio. So I like how he brought out those instances. Now there is an allegation of personal gain, personal interest being put forward by the NLC. There is also an allegation of the federal government, the government using judiciary to sabotage labor leaders. Now we have it's like a dilemma. Now what would you rather have asked NLC to do in that kind of situation? Because he mentioned negotiation, but the federal government and labor leaders the labor generally have been on negotiations here and there. So at that juncture that we got to, what do you think NLC could have done differently that would even be more effective than the strike?
Well, don't get me wrong. I do not think it is wrong for labor to go on strike.
Okay.
There are two strikes here, if I can.
Yeah, please go ahead.
NLC, the national, had said a few weeks ago that we may go on strike even without warning. They already said that. Okay. Now, and they had not yet gone on that strike. Now, something happened within Imo State. Do you understand?
Yes.
And then the state Congress thought they should go on strike or on a protest, and it happened to be the eve of an election. I think that was bad time.
No, I mean the Tuesday. Okay,
yeah,
okay.
I'm going, because I do not want to be guilty of what you call selective ethics here, and just say things so that it will suit certain purposes. No, the rules must apply to everyone. Now, you then come back, as a result of this protest, the president of the NLC, why wasn't the chairman of the state NLC beaten up? The president was beaten up, okay? And then you now decide that because the president was beaten up, you have forgotten the fact that you were going to protest anyway because of the high cost of living, the inflation, the removal of subsidy, and all that. You are no longer talking about that. You are talking about the fact that the president of the NL Labour Congress was beaten up. When after a protest strike that was instigated, as far as I'm concerned, by political voting, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we should do selective ethics here. Rather than if they kept talking about the bigger issue of the strike as a result of the high cost of living, removal of subsidy, unification of the exchange rate, all those ones. I was watching, I went to hear the conversation. They left that conversation and went to, that's one. And secondly, is that Nigerians, governments, and other institutions have, even individuals, do not even obey court orders. I mean, the last administration was Malami, the former minister. He was a serial somebody who never obeyed court orders, And I think I'm watching this government. There are some things that maybe if you say the presidency did not do some, how about the agencies under the EFCC, as you have said, and then the DSS, and then even the correctional institution and all that. You could see that something is wrong with us. There's impunity, as Emeka said. There is now the courts themselves, considering that it looks like you can go and buy yourself a judgment. Do you understand? You can almost go and buy judgment in any of our courts now. You recall the statement by Justice Tatijo, who retired about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The indictment from the Supreme Court, the indictment of the judicial system in Nigeria by a Supreme Court justice. And somebody else before him, a female who retired, also pretty much spoke in the same vein, which means we have issues with our judicial system. Should people disobey the judicial system because of that? No. But certainly you will understand if Labour chooses not to obey. Because they know people who go and buy. You recall there was a senator at the last sitting of the 9th Senate. There was somebody whose wife was a justice, of the Federal Court of Appeal. And he did say that right here, I know some of you who will come to me to appeal to my wife. So when you look at that, you don't really want to have any respect for the judicial system in this country.
So, but what back to the question again, what exactly should labor unions rather have done? Because still many feel the strike is not effective. Now, I mean, aside that strike now.
Okay, what else would they have done besides going on the strike?
What else?
I don't know what else they can do.
Because we've mentioned negotiations on this table, and negotiations have been ongoing for some time.
And it appears that the government is probably delaying or playing delaying tactics and all that, and they are impatient. Don't forget that the officials of NLC or the labor unions, they are tools in the hands of their those who follow them. They too, they are under pressure. They also think that, maybe your guy has been compromised.
Exactly.
You understand? So they too need to somebody says Caesar's wife must not only be beyond suspicion, she has to be seen to be beyond suspicion. And I think that is what the labor leader is trying to do. Look, we do not have, we are not compromised, we are not going to compromise. So if we are going to go on a strike, let's go on a strike. But it should not be, if the Labour president was picked up on a different situation and picked up, if they want to go on strike, I will support them. But not an ill-timed protest in Imo State. I'm interested in Imo State because I live in Imo State for almost 5 years. So for me, whatever happens there is that it's like home, second home to me. So I'm interested in what is happening. Anybody, including Nigeria, who is a native of, because his name, Nigeria, I know he's a native of Owerri. town itself. So including him should not disrupt the peace of Owerri. I get to that place, it's a peaceful place, and I love the place.
All right, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a very great conversation and time out. Thank you so much to you too, Mr. Ahmad Nagu, for joining, despite the tight schedule and you were on transit. Thank you so much. And this is where we round it off on Editors Forum this edition. Do join us again on Saturday next week for another wonderful conversation. I remain Layo Shubo for Lauren Shaw.